Hello, and welcome back to the Ripe Good Scholar YouTube channel. My name is Sarah. Today we're going to work through Act 2 of Macbeth. The plan has been set. Now we get to watch the murder happen. Off stage, we get to hear about the murder happening. Let's get some blood on our hands. How goes the night, boy? The moon is down. I have not heard the clock. And she goes down at 12. I take it, 'tis later, sir. Hold, take my sword. There's husbandry in heaven. Their candles are all out. Take thee that too. A heavy summons lies like lead upon me, and yet I would not sleep. Merciful powers, restrain in me the cursed thoughts that nature gives way to in repose. Banquo and his son are talking about the night. Some strange omens seem to be around, but in general it's just small talk. They wonder what time it is and such. Banquo, however, feels a sense of foreboding that is keeping him up at night. Can't imagine why. Macbeth comes in, and Banquo is surprised that Macbeth is still up. There's some more small talk before Banquo brings up the witches. It's a hard topic to let go. All's well. I dreamt last night of the three weird sisters. To you they have showed some truth. I think not of them. Yet when we can entreat an hour to serve, we would spend it in some words upon that business, if you would grant the time. Macbeth tries to convince Banquo that he hasn't even thought about the weird sisters. I mean, you run into three mysterious witches in the woods who proclaim you king, Mondays, am I right? Macbeth assures Banquo that he would love to talk about it further when they have the time. He doesn't really want to talk about it on account of the murder. Banquo promises to wait on bated breath. He might be lying too, I don't know at this point. Macbeth is left alone and has a vision of a bloody dagger floating before him. It makes him really think about what he's about to do. It doesn't change his mind, but he at least thinks about it. Is this a dagger which I see before me? The handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not. And yet I see thee still. Art thou not, fatal vision, sensible to feeling as to sight? Art thou but a dagger of the mind, a false creation, proceeding from the heat-oppressed brain? I see thee yet, in form as palpable as this which now I draw. Thou marshallest me the way that I was going. Such an instrument I was to use. Mine eyes are made the fools of the other senses, or else worth all the rest. I see thee still, and on thy blade and dudgeon gouts of blood, which was not so before. There's no such thing. It is the bloody business which informs thus to mine eyes. Now o'er the one half-world nature seems dead, and wicked dreams abuse the curtained sleep. Witchcraft celebrates pale Hecate's offerings, and withered murder, alarmed by his sentinel, the wolf whose howls his watch, thus with his stealthy pace, with Tarquin's ravishing strides, toward his design moves like a ghost. Thou sure and firm set earth, hear not my steps, which way they walk, for fear thy very stones prate of my whereabout, and take the present horror from the time, which now suits with it. Whiles I threat, he lives. Words to the heat of deeds too cold breath gives. Macbeth is mostly just hoping here that he can be quiet enough so as to not get caught. The bell tolls midnight, and Macbeth goes to kill the king. That which hath made them drunk hath made me bold. What hath quenched them hath given me fire. Hark, peace! It was the owl that shrieked, the fatal bellman, which does give the sternest good night. He is about. The doors are open, and the surfeited grooms do mock their charge with snores. I have drugged their possets, that death and nature do contend about with them, whether they live or die. Who's there? What ho? Alack, I'm afraid they have awaked, and 'tis not done. The attempt and not the deed confounds us. Hark! I laid their daggers ready, he could not miss them. Had he not resembled my father as he slept, I had done it. Lady Macbeth revels in her success of getting the king's servants drunk. It's made her drunk with power. She's honestly a little too excited about it. She admits she would have killed the king herself in that moment if it hadn't been for the fact that he looked so much like her father. There's just a lot to unpack there. At least she's not a complete monster. Podcast episode on Lady Macbeth linked below. Macbeth enters with bloody hands and the daggers. He's in shock over killing the king, which is understandable. It's not every day you go like stabby on a house guest. He starts rambling about not being able to say amen when the servants woke up and prayed briefly. He's extremely concerned about it. Which, like, okay. Lady Macbeth doesn't want him to worry, but that's easier said than done. He also heard a voice that said he wasn't going to sleep ever again, which is also somewhat alarming. Sleep is necessary. And great. One cried, "God bless us," and "Amen," the other, as they had seen me with these hangman's hands. Listening their fear, I could not say amen when they did say, "God bless us." Consider it not so deeply. But wherefore could not I pronounce amen? I had most need of blessing, and amen stuck in my throat. These deeds must not be thought after these ways, so it will make us mad. Methought I heard a voice cry, "Sleep no more. Macbeth does murder sleep. The innocent sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care. The death of each day's life, sore labor's bath. Balm of hurt minds, great nature's second course. Chief nourisher in life's feast." What do you mean? Still it cried, "Sleep no more," to all the house. Glamis hath murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more. Who was it that thus cried? Why, worthy Thane, you do unbend your noble strength to think so brain sickly of things. Go, get some water, and wash this filthy witness from your hand. Why did you bring these daggers from the place? They must lie there. Go, carry them, and smear the sleepy grooms with blood. I'll no more. I am afraid to think what I have done. Look on it again, I dare not. Infirm of purpose, give me the daggers. The sleeping and the dead are but as pictures. 'Tis the eye of childhood that fears the painted devil. If he do bleed, I'll gild the faces of the grooms withal, for it must seem their guilt. It's pretty clear to Lady Macbeth, and the audience for that matter, that he's cracking. She tells Macbeth to get a hold of himself and put the daggers back into the room where they're supposed to be. He can't go in the room, so Lady Macbeth does it. There's a knocking at the door, which spooks Macbeth even more. Lady Macbeth re-enters with bloody hands. She makes a point of telling Macbeth that her hands are also bloody, but she's not like losing her mind over it. Lady Macbeth tells him to go wash his hands and put on his pajamas because it can't be looking like they were running around stabbing people in the night. As they scurry off, a porter comes to open the door. But he's drunk. Like really drunk. And typically portrayed as peeing against the castle wall. He imagines the knocking prompts him to open various doors to hell, and he comments on the sins of the people he sees. Here's a knocking indeed. If a man were porter of Hellgate, he should have old turning the key. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there, in the name of Beelzebub? Here's a farmer that hanged himself on the expectation of plenty. Come in time, have napkins enow about you. Here you'll sweat for it. Knock, knock. Who's there? In the other devil's name. Faith, here's an equivocator that could swear in both the scales against either scale, who committed treason enough for God's sake, yet could not equivocate to heaven. Oh, come in, equivocator. Knock, knock, knock. Who's there? Faith, here's an English tailor come hither, for stealing out a French hose. Come in, tailor, here you may roast your goose. Knock, knock, never at quiet. What are you? But this place is too cold for hell. I'll devil porter it no further. I had thought to have let in some of all professions that go the primrose way to the everlasting bonfire. Now, I have to say in an aside here, one of my favorite portrayals of this was with the Cincinnati Shakespeare Company, because in that last knocking where he goes, "What are you?" he acted as though he had opened a door to the theater. So, theaters nowadays are particularly cold. The temperature is kept low. So he's like, "Oh, it's too cold in here for hell," which I just found hilarious. It was executed brilliantly. Now back to the porter. Eventually, he actually opens the castle door because, that is his job after all. Macduff and Lennox being unimportant here, are waiting. Macduff wants to know what took so long. The porter explains that he was drunk, and drunkenness provokes 3 things: red noses, sleep, and pee. It provokes the desire for sex too, but inhibits the performance. I mean, at least he's honest. Macduff, probably out of desire to end the conversation, asks if Macbeth is awake. Macbeth appears and welcomes his new guests. They are there to see the king, who isn't awake yet, and never will be. Macbeth escorts Macduff to the king's room. While Macduff is in there, Lennox comments about how crazy the night before was. There was terrible storms, the animals were acting weird, the earth shook, and there were horrible prophecies. Macbeth admits that sounds pretty crazy. I'm sure it had nothing to do with the regicide taking place. I mean, what? Oh, horror! 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 Tongue nor heart can conceive nor name thee. What's the matter? Confusion now hath made his masterpiece. Most sacrilegious murder hath broke ope the Lord's anointed temple, and stole thence the life of the building. What is it you say, the life? Mean you his majesty? Approach the chamber, and destroy your sight with a new gorgon. Do not bid me speak. See, and then speak yourselves. Macduff comes stumbling out of the king's room, screaming murder. The other 2 go to see for themselves. Macduff starts screaming more to wake up the whole castle and command the bells to ring. Lady Macbeth comes out of her room wondering what all the commotion is about. Macduff doesn't want to say it to her delicate lady ears. So he tells Banquo when he runs in a moment later, because delicate lady ears can hear horrible news as long as they're not being delivered directly to said lady's ears. That's just science. Lady Macbeth is shocked that the king was murdered in her house. Macbeth comes out of the room wishing he had died before the king, because then he could have died happy. Duncan's sons ask who could have done it, and Lennox explains it looks like it was his servants. Unfortunately, they can't question the servants because Macbeth, in a fit of rage and grief, murdered them. The funny thing about this whole part is that in Holinshed it says that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth made such a show of their grief that it actually made everybody really suspicious of them. Duncan's sons see the writing on the wall and decide to flee before getting arrested or murdered themselves. Lady Macbeth faints and is carried out. Why do we hold our tongues that most they claim this argument for ours? What should be spoken here, where our fate, hid in an auger hole, may rush and seize us? Let's away, our tears are not yet brewed, nor our strong sorrow upon the foot of motion. The men all decide to get their manly wits together and meet in the great hall. Malcolm, Duncan's oldest son, flees to England, and Donalbain to Ireland. In the next scene, Ross and an old man discuss the continuing strangeness happening all over the country. Owls are flying around in the daytime, taking out falcons. Duncan's horses have turned wild and busted out of the stables. It's madness. 'Tis unnatural, even like the deed that's done. On Tuesday last, a falcon, towering in her pride of place, was by a mousing owl hucked at and killed. And Duncan's horses, a thing most strange and certain, beauteous and swift, the minions of their race, turned wild in nature, broke their stalls, flung out, contending against obedience, as they would make war with mankind. Again, this probably has nothing to do with the regicide. Now Macduff enters to provide some exposition for the audience. It's just for the audience. Anyway. The king's sons are the suspected masterminds of the murder committed by the king's servants. Macbeth is king now, and is on his way to Scone for the coronation. Ross decides that he will go to the coronation. Macduff, however, decides to go to Fife. And that's the end of Act 2. It went quick, but so much important stuff happened. Obviously, the king was murdered, but more importantly, we saw how Macbeth and Lady Macbeth reacted to the murder. Macbeth, even before committing the act, is filled with shame and guilt over the deed, to the point that he hallucinates a few times in a single evening. We're starting to see the cracks in Macbeth. On the other hand, we have Lady Macbeth, who is almost proud of what she's done. This is important to remember as the play continues. Lady Macbeth, all in on the murder. Macbeth, more hesitant, more shameful. Will this dynamic continue? Wink, wink. Of course, Shakespeare can never let things get too serious. So we have the scene with the drunken porter. His humorous musings on the sins of man and the gates of hell and the realities of drunkenness really lighten the mood, which I suppose says something about the tone of the play. We can repeatedly see Shakespeare break up the seriousness of his plays with some humor. I believe this served a few purposes. One, he got to make use of the comic actors. These were often some of the most popular, names that we still know today. So it makes sense for Shakespeare to make use of their talents. They were also probably on the payroll, so. In addition, these comic scenes were there for simple entertainment value. Despite the fact that the early modern English would have made the runtime a little shorter than we have today, these plays are kind of long, especially if you're standing. It couldn't be all doom and gloom and madness. There had to be some drunken wall peeing, too. And with that, we're ready for the next act. We'll see how Macbeth does as king, and if he's worried still about that pesky Banquo. Join us next time as we look at Act 3. If you want to make sure you don't miss that or any future episodes, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Let me know all of your thoughts, questions, and comments in the section down below. For more Shakespeare fun in the meantime, check out my blog at ripegoodscholar.com. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, links down below. You should also check out my podcast where my husband and I talk about kind of the enduring power of Shakespeare. Or watch my previous series on A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's all for today. See you next time, and remember, go wisely and go slowly. Those who rush stumble and fall.